r/Nosleep. Posted by you/thatonecityinchina. If you ever get an invitation to attend Mr. Wax's traveling circus, do not go under any circumstances. The 80s were a simpler time, a simpler era. There were no smartphones, so you'd have to go to the kitchen to use the landline to call your friends. There was no Xbox, no Wii, so we'd go to the local park or the woods to hang out instead. No electric scooters or hoverboards, just rusty bikes we'd pull out from the garage every spring when the weather got warmer. We found our own ways to have fun, riding through the streets with no clear goal in mind, even though there wasn't much to do in a small town like Lakewood, Michigan. And maybe that sense of freedom was the reason why, despite all the red flags, we attended Mr. Wax's traveling circus. My name is Jason, and I am writing this as a warning to you all. If Mr. Wax's traveling circus ever pops up in your area, do not attend under any circumstances. Ha, I have the most money. I win. Hot summer days back in the 80s were best spent in the cool, shaded safety of Schmidt-Niemann's treehouse. He was the only son of a divorced PTA mom and a successful Wall Street businessman, so he received all the coolest and latest games and gadgets from both parents to win his affections, but he was also a hugely insecure, spoiled jackass, so it took a certain kind of patience to be his friend. Dude, you can't win at Monopoly. How many times do I have to tell you? Shit goes on forever. Wyatt rolled his eyes. Wyatt, Schmidt, and I had known each other since pretty much childhood, due to our fathers being best friends from college. Wyatt and I were tight, and we were pretty much always at odds with Schmidt, but we couldn't give up the perks of Schmidt's cool treehouse enough to let Schmidt's shitty personality get to us. But I did win. I have the most money, and the game's name is Monopoly. So, I won. Schmidt argued. Just let him think he won. I don't want to hear him whine for the next half an hour. Artie whispered as Schmidt packed up the board. Introverted Arthur Lee and his extroverted older sister, Jenny Lee, moved into town a few months prior, and Schmidt immediately took it upon himself to become friends with them. It wasn't because he particularly liked Arthur, but because he had a huge crush on Jenny the moment he laid his beady little eyes on her. Speaking of, where's Jenny? Schmidt asked coolly. We knew his attitude was a bluff. He had the biggest crush on Jenny out of all of us. She can't leave her room until she finishes her homework. She'll probably be here in a few minutes. Artie shrugged. Apparently 8th graders have more homework than we do. Why, are you finally gonna tell her you like her? Wyatt teased, making kissing sounds. Schmidt and Jenny, sitting in a tree, KISS. Shut up. I don't even like her, you dickhead. Schmidt kicked Wyatt's leg, and Wyatt grabbed his foot in retaliation. Artie and I watched as they started tussling, and I leaned back on my hands. This is not the way I wanted to spend summer vacation. I sighed. My parents had to cancel a vacation to Disney because my grandmother had fallen sick and my mom had to take care of her. Tell me about it. If Schmidt makes us play even one more round of Monopoly, I'm going to kill myself. Artie rolled his eyes. Why do we have to hang out with him again? 'Cause he has the treehouse. I heard that. Schmidt exclaimed, fingers shoved up Wyatt's nose. Wyatt himself was punching Schmidt's thighs. You guys are such assholes, I knew you. Are you guys fighting up there again? As soon as we heard Jenny's voice, all fighting seemed to cease at once. We heard her climbing up the wooden ladder, and we straightened up at the same time. The treehouse is gonna break if you keep tussling in here like that. Jenny's head popped up into the entryway. She hoisted herself up into the small treehouse with a big smile. By middle school standards, Jenny was one of the prettiest girls at school, and she was immensely popular. At the time, I couldn't fathom why she chose to hang out with us idiots instead of the cooler kids at school. Hey, Jenny. Schmidt leaned back on one arm, the other one resting on his knee, trying to look as macho as possible. It wasn't working. How are ya? Just peachy. Didn't finish my homework in the end, but Mom doesn't have to know that. She shot a look at Artie as she put down her backpack. Anyway, guys, look what I found in the mailbox before I came. We all gathered in a circle around Jenny as she pulled a folded piece of paper out of her back pocket. I thought it was a letter from my friend from back home, but it was actually a flyer for the circus. She unfolded the flyer, revealing a bright red and white striped circus tent with elephants, clowns, and a tall ringmaster with undecipherable features surrounding the tent. In big, dramatic letters, the flyer read Mr. Wax's traveling circus. Circus? Wyatt wrinkled his nose. We've never had a circus in town before. I've been to plenty of circuses, Schmidt crossed his arms. My dad took me 100 times when I was little. And I always had front row seats and got to meet the ringmaster. I even pet the lions before. No one cares, Schmidt. I muttered. I've never been to a circus. I was sick when my parents took Artie to see the Ringling Brothers. Jenny sighed. I really want to go. It's not my fault you got sick. Artie sighed, exasperated. Where is this circus anyway? It's, Jenny looked down at the flyer. I'm not really sure. It doesn't really say anywhere on it. Wait, Wyatt grabbed the flyer from Jenny and pointed to the back. It was a little map of the town, focusing on Jenny and Artie's home with a red dotted line trailing beyond their backyard. It looked as if it was drawn with a crayon. That X must be where it is. I glanced at the crude map, an unsettling feeling resting in my stomach. Weird. It was like the directions were specifically tailored for Jenny and Artie, whose house was at the end of a cul-de-sac. Their backyard faced a thick grove of woods separated by their fence. The woods eventually tapered off into an enormous lake that bordered the town. The kids of the town were told not to go in there, but we were kids. We went into the woods all the time. But even we never went that far into the woods. That's so convenient, we should go. When else will a circus come into Lakewood? Jenny looked stoked. She and Artie came from a bigger town, so the lack of things to do in suburban Lakewood was a bit of a letdown for her. Yeah, let's go. Schmidt parroted. He was such a simp. I looked at Wyatt and he shrugged back. We didn't have any reason to not go, but it was a bit too spontaneous for us to say yes without getting our parents' permission first. When we glanced at Artie, he didn't seem too sure. Artie? Jenny elbowed Artie in the side. You're serious about this? He replied. Aren't circuses supposed to be in the bigger part of a town? Like at the stadium or something? The woods are big enough to hold a circus. My dad says there's plenty of real estate opportunities on the other side of the lake. Schmidt said. No, you dingus, shouldn't a circus be somewhere people actually live, and not out of the way in the middle of nowhere? Artie mumbled. Anyway, my mom said the woods are dangerous. What are you, chicken? Jenny giggled. Yeah, you chicken? Schmidt sneered, trying to look tough for Jenny. These woods aren't safe. When we moved here, our parents told us to never go into the woods alone. They said a lot of people have gone missing here. Artie said, pushing up his glasses. I understood where he was coming from. Out of all of us, he was the only one who had never gone into the woods before, and Artie was always the careful, paranoid type. And my parents told me the same thing even though I ignored their words and went anyway. Really? Just because you've never been in there before, you're gonna tell us that it's dangerous? Jenny challenged. High schoolers go to the lake all the time. Schmidt nodded. Do none of you realize this is exactly how people get kidnapped? Artie retorted, looking around. Am I the only one with any common sense here? Look, if you don't want to go, you don't have to. Jenny declared, ignoring Artie's hysterics. But I want to go. Who's in? Schmidt's hand went up immediately. Wyatt, Artie, and I hesitantly glanced at each other, but as soon as we saw Jenny's pleading smile, Wyatt and I reluctantly raised our hands. And as peer pressure dictated, Artie eventually agreed, as well under the pretense of keeping his sister safe and proving he was right. After a late lunch at the treehouse, we began wandering into the woods, using the crayon-drawn map as our guide. This was a time before having GPS-installed cell phones was the norm, so we were mostly using the map, the markings on the trees, and our memory to get through the path. Up to a certain point, we were confident we knew where we were going, with Wyatt and Jenny leading the way. But that confidence didn't last too long. Where even are we? Artie complained. Relax. We come here all the time. Schmidt said, although he himself was trailing behind as well. Okay, but have you ever been to this big-ass lake? Artie retorted. Again, none of us had ever actually made it to the lake before. If it weren't for the town maps and older high school kids who found an easier path they could take by car, we would have written it off as an urban legend. It was just too far and out of the way. We just have to keep going north. Wyatt had a tiny compass with him that he bought from a Scholastic book fair. He always brought it along when we went into the forest, because he had an affinity for survival scenarios. In fact, he had brought along his survival fanny pack, full of small gadgets that supposedly could help in dire situations. The lake is at the northernmost point of the woods. And so we continued to walk, picking up sticks along the way and sword fighting to keep ourselves distracted from the fact that it was hot and sweaty. Hey, do these woods have critters? Artie asked after a while, clearly uneasy. What, like birds and beavers? Wyatt laughed. No, bigger things like mountain lions. Or like deer. Deer? Jenny looked confused. I mean, I've never seen one. But it's a forest, so. 'Cause I think I see a deer over there, in the distance. Artie pointed ahead. We all looked but didn't see anything of the sort. It's probably a tree branch, Wyatt said. No, it was like, moving. Artie insisted. Maybe we should turn back. Stop making stuff up, Art. Jenny rolled her eyes. I'm not making it up. I saw a deer. Dude, deer are weak as hell. I could probably kill a deer with my bare hands. Schmidt boasted. Sure you can, Schmidt. Wyatt coughed in disagreement. Okay, stop. Artie ran to the front of the group, and we slowed into a halt. Do any of you guys know where we're going? Wyatt and I looked at each other with uncertainty. Schmidt avoided Artie's stare. We just have to follow the map. Jenny said. Well, where on the map are we? We obviously diverged from the path a long time ago. Artie pointed out. He glanced at his G-Shock. It's been almost an hour. Just because we keep going north doesn't mean we're headed the right way. I plopped on a rock. It was hot, and we had been walking for a long time. I had to admit I was tired. Artie has a point. We've been walking for a while. Come on guys, we're almost there, probably. Even Jenny sounded unsure. Just admit we're lost, Jenny. Artie said. Let's just go back. At this rate, it's gonna take us another hour to get back home. And it's already getting dark. But we're seriously almost there. I can feel it. Jenny insisted. And we came all this way anyway, what's a little more walking? I feel it too. Schmidt chimed in. Wyatt seemed unsure, but Jenny also had a point. We had come a long way and it would have been disappointing to walk back an hour after a fruitless trip into the woods. I was beginning to see why Jenny hung out with us. We pretty much went along with whatever she wanted. Schmidt especially. You always do this, you always do what you want to do and you don't care about what anyone else wants to do. Artie pointed an accusing finger at Jenny, who looked annoyed. You've been dragging us through these woods for an hour and you don't even know where you're going. I didn't force you to come. You always complain about this and that. Why can't you just lighten up for a change? She retorted. You know, I never even wanted to go to the circus that time. I wanted to go to Six Flags. Mom and Dad took me to the circus because they already bought tickets by the time you were sick and couldn't refund them. The situation quickly devolved into an awkward sibling spat, with Artie and Jenny yelling at each other about all their grievances piled over the years. The rest of us stood to the side awkwardly as the siblings hurled insults at one another. It was clear we couldn't have gotten in the middle of their argument. At this point, I just wanted to go home. Circus or not, it was going to get dark soon and we should have turned back while we still had our sense of direction. But amidst the yelling, I suddenly heard a sharp whistle-like sound in the distance. Wait, guys, I interrupted. Do you hear that? Hear what? Wyatt asked. The sharp whistle had stopped, but a familiar melody took its place. It sounded like a single woodwind version of the classic circus theme, but slower and more drawn out. The sound bounced off the trees, creating a strange echo. Yeah, I hear it. Jenny piped up, excited. She turned to Artie, triumphant. See, we must be near the circus if we can hear their music. Or it could be a serial killer, Artie mumbled under his breath as we all headed in the direction of the music. The music slowly turned from a woodwind instrument to what sounded like a muted orchestra of trumpets and snare drums playing the circus music. It led us through brambles and an even more off-the-beaten path until we finally saw a dimly lit, dingy-looking circus tent, the muted music coming out from it. It was situated right in front of the lake, just as the map said. It was big. Bigger than I expected, at least. The dull red color of the tent stood out against the color sequence of the woods. Behind the biggest tent poked out a series of smaller, patched-up rubber tents, presumably for the performers. Besides the size, however, it lacked something I couldn't quite put my hands on, the quality that made people excited to go to the circus. It just wasn't as colorful or as circus-y as I knew circuses should have been. But it was a circus nonetheless. Well, would you look at that? Wyatt said, putting away his compass. See? Jenny nudged Artie. You worry too much for no reason. We're kinda late, I pointed out. From the looks of it, it's already started. Hopefully it'll end soon. Artie grumbled. A rustle of leaves echoed behind us, and I whipped around. Welcome. The first thing I noticed about the man was his giant grin and big teeth. They seemed too big and long to be normal, and it immediately threw me off, which was ironic considering his height should have been the first thing that caught my eye. He was one of the thinnest and tallest men I'd ever seen. The second thing I noticed was his pale, waxy disposition. He looked like one of those mannequins I'd see in store displays whenever my mom took me to the mall. The only difference was that those mannequins didn't move and smile, and his smile was big. Schmidt shrieked and hid behind Jenny. Wyatt and Artie were clearly thrown off by the sudden greeting but held their ground. I knew I had heard some chatter outside. "You must be here for my circus." The man's grin widened, his head tilted at a strange angle. "Your circus?" I said. "So, you're..." The man bowed with smooth, dramatic flair. He spoke with all the cheerful gusto of a 1960s radiocaster. "Charlie Wax, ringleader of Mr. Wax's traveling circus, at your service. Showcasing the daring limits of the human body, providing the endless entertainment of being pushed to one's boundaries since 1969. Magic, wonder, joy, and fun. The splendid spectacles that befall you will surely leave a lasting impression. I see you've received my very special invitation." He plucked the flyer from Jenny's hand with 2 fingers, crumpling it. When he opened his hands, the flyer was gone. "I'd love to say you're just in time, but you are just a little bit late." Leaves crackled behind me. I turned around, only to be face to face with 2 young girls grinning at me. Upon closer inspection, I realized they were conjoined twins, something I only knew about because I went through an old medical textbook in the school library out of morbid curiosity one day. I couldn't tell exactly where they were conjoined through their puffy circus outfits, but they only had one set of arms and legs between the 2 of them, so they were definitely melded somewhere in the middle. One of the twins had a bright smile, the other one, not so much. She looked a bit more tired, a smile painted onto her face to cover up her graying face and lack of a genuine disposition. I felt goosebumps rising on my arm. "We're Hannah and Lana, and we're so happy you're here," they said in perfect unison, holding out their hands. "See, can we still come in?" Schmidt asked. "But of course. Better late than never, that's what I always say. Children, there's only one rule here at the circus, and that's to enjoy yourselves," Mr. Wax said, gently placing his hands atop of Jenny's shoulders, giving it a little squeeze. "We hope you have a splendid time." She looked extremely uncomfortable as she brushed him off and walked towards the tent, the rest of us following suit. I turned back to glance at Mr. Wax and the twins, and they had the same perma-smile plastered on their faces as they watched us go inside. The inside of the circus tent was starkly different from the outside. The outside of the tent was dingy and worn-looking, but the inside had a merry, lively atmosphere. Stage lights lined the circumference of the tent, and a set of wooden bleachers faced the main stage, where a big-bellied clown was juggling 10 different items on a unicycle. A lone concession stand stood off to the side, with a worn sign saying snacks on the top. After marveling the aesthetics of the circus for a moment, Jenny turned to us, looking apologetic. "Hey, I know that was a little weird, but let's shake it off, yeah?" she said. "Circuses are supposed to be weird, aren't they?" "Oh yeah, for sure. All the ones I've been to were kind of weird," Schmidt reassured her. As the 2 walked towards the concession stand, I pulled Wyatt and Artie to the side. "This is more than a little weird," I yelled to them. "Something's super off about this place. You guys can tell too, right?" "What? Like the girls who were stuck together?" Wyatt shrugged. "I mean, it's a little weird, but we shouldn't judge them." "No, this entire thing's weird. Mr. Wax was weird. Those girls? Weird. And I'm not just talking about how they look. I can't be the only one seeing this." I shook my head. "Guys, come over here. The snacks are free." Jenny waved us over from the concession stand. Wyatt gave me a shrug and extracted himself from my grip, heading for the free popcorn. "Artie, come on. You've noticed something's off, haven't you?" I insisted. "That's what I've been saying, but none of you guys listened to me." Artie crossed his arms. "Now we're in the middle of a forest at night, in a suspicious-looking circus tent, with no parental supervision and nowhere to run." I sighed. He was right, but I didn't want to totally concede to the idea of being helpless. "I mean, at least we're not alone." Artie nodded towards the small crowd that had already congregated at the bleachers. I recognized most of the kids from school, but they weren't the kind of acquaintances I would go out of my way to say hi to. And it wasn't like they noticed our arrival, either. Strangely enough, there were no adults. They can't possibly murder or kidnap all of us without, like, alerting the town, right? I said. "Hopefully not. I don't know," Artie replied. Behind the concession stand was a boy in a bright red pinstriped suit, pouring popcorn into red and white striped buckets. Huge, deer-like antlers sprouted from his head. He looked up briefly, met my eyes, and went back to pouring the popcorn. "Welcome, he said. "I'm Danny the deer boy, and I hope you have a splendid time." He didn't sound happy to be there at all. I gulped, taking the box of popcorn. Are those real?" I pointed to his antlers. For some reason, I thought it was perhaps a circus gimmick, but as soon as the words left my mouth, I felt an overwhelming sense of regret. Danny the deer boy hesitated, looked over my shoulder, and froze up. I turned around, only to be face to face with Hannah and Lana again. My heart skipped a beat as their eyeballs slid from me to the deer boy in a sickeningly fluid motion. They had a tight smile on their faces, and they seemed to be motioning for deer boy to put on the same smile as well. "Yeah," the deer boy mumbled, looking down at his shoes. Danny the deer boy has a rare genetic condition that causes him to grow antlers out of his head. A marvelous spectacle, a marvelous, splendid spectacle indeed. Hannah chirped. Something told me that wasn't the case at all. All are welcome here at Mr. Wax's traveling circus. "You shouldn't miss the show," Lana coughed. A vile expression shot across Hannah's face at the cough for a split second, before turning back to the fake default sunny disposition. I don't know if she noticed that I noticed, but it didn't seem to matter. "Let us show you to your seats." As they walked away, I looked back at the deer boy one more time out of curiosity. He had already turned around, bending over to tie the full garbage bag behind him. I couldn't help but note the small piccolo sticking out from his back pocket. Jenny and Schmidt had managed to find seats near the middle front. The kids from school probably made room for Jenny, Wyatt, Artie, and I had to scramble to find an area on the bleachers that was wide enough for the three of us, and finally found less than optimal seats in the far right corner. A big pole blocked a good portion of the view. As we sat down, gigantic fanfare played as fire-breathing men blew flames into the top of the tent, and stadium lights lining the tent lit up simultaneously. A few jugglers and unicycle riders circled the stage with red and white pinstriped umbrellas, directing the attention towards the big, bald clown as Hannah and Lana bounced up and announced the next act to come. "Thank you, Terrence, for that wonderful performance. And you won't believe it, but he turned 18 today. Can we get another applause for our birthday clown?" Hannah cheered. "Next up, we have our dance troupe, who have been preparing this special opening day number just for you." The overweight clown stumbled off the stage as soon as he was done. Because he exited the stage on our side, we could see him walking out through an exit on the other side. He began coughing, and his complexion didn't look so good. He looked pale in the bright lights of the circus tent illuminated his sweaty face. As soon as he walked out, a line of what I believed were young ballerinas came on stage with the same umbrellas as the jugglers and unicyclers. Spinning the umbrellas around, they put on an intricate dance show that seemed to mesmerize the audience. I glanced at Jenny and Schmidt. The latter was pointing out little details of the show that probably contributed nothing to the viewing experience. Jenny didn't seem to mind. She was immediately enamored by the flexibilities and skills of the dancers, who looked even younger than us. They all had the same smile plastered on their faces as they bent their bodies in unnatural angles to the music. I sighed, turning back. We didn't exactly have the greatest view, and adjusting ourselves every 5 seconds just to see what was going on was getting tiresome. Of the three of us, Wyatt had the best view, which wasn't saying much. "These seats are ass," Wyatt declared. "So are the snacks. This popcorn tastes stale as hell. I can't believe we walked for an hour for this." I agreed. "I told you guys. No one listens to me, ever," Artie grumbled, taking a bite out of his cotton candy. "Might as well make the best of it," Wyatt said, stealing a bite out of Artie's cotton candy. We continued watching whatever we could, craning our necks. We quickly discovered that when you can't really see what's going on, circuses are just loud and rowdy. We watched as the young dancers transitioned into a brother-sister trapeze act. The trapeze artists swung from ring to ring in the ceilings, even smoothly transitioning into a flaming ring of fire. A masked lion tamer came out with 2 lions, masterfully manipulating the lions through a haphazard obstacle course. A blindfolded tightrope walker then followed, using a balance beam to walk through the thin wire that connected from one end of the ceiling to the other. It was just a regular circus performance, nothing out of the ordinary. I was kind of glad about that. At least it wasn't Artie's worst-case scenario in which we were lured into a fake circus to be kidnapped. And then I was hit with the need to pee. "Guys, I need to go to the bathroom," I said. "What?" Artie looked around. "There aren't any bathrooms here, man." "Then can you guys go outside with me?" I asked. "No way. We just sat down. I don't want to lose our spot." Wyatt shook his head. I groaned and turned to Artie, the easier one to convince despite all his misgivings. "Art, can you please go with me? I don't want to go outside alone." Can you hold it in? No. Why me? Why can't Wyatt go? I want to watch the show. You didn't even want to be here. Wyatt retorted. But I called dibs on saving our seats. He grinned. That doesn't mean you can even see anything from here anyway. Fine. Ever the pushover, Artie reluctantly stood up and started walking down the wooden bleachers, and I followed suit. He motioned at an open flap in the corner of the tent, and we crawled outside into the open air. Dude, hurry up. This area just gives me the heebie-jeebies. Artie shivered. It was summer, but towards the evenings the weather could still get chilly. Considering we were right next to a lake, it was even colder than usual. Okay. I sauntered off into the nearby bushes. As I took care of my business, I looked around the woods. We had never made it this far out into the woods, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of guilt for coming all the way out here without my parents knowing. Maybe Artie was right, we should have been a little less spontaneous about our decision to come here, especially now that it was getting dark. The sunset reflected nicely off the lake, illuminating our surroundings despite the setting sun. It was an eerie calm in contrast with the jovial circus tent. We heard laughter and applause coming from inside the tent, which was pretty much the only thing keeping me grounded. I heard a rustle in the distance and zipped up my pants instinctively. Behind me, Artie stood on lookout, his arms crossed. He didn't seem to notice. I slowly turned my head in the direction of the rustle, until a shadowy figure emerged into view. My eyes widened. Hey Artie, there's someone over there. I yelled. Huh? I grabbed him and we both ducked in the bushes. In the distance, we saw the outline of what seemed to be the round clown from earlier, slowly coming closer. He was hacking and coughing. The light from the lake illuminated his features enough for us to see that his face was contorted in immense pain. His bald head, smeared haphazardly with white face paint, was drenched in sweat. As he coughed, a strange black liquid came out from his throat. Look, I pointed. Isn't that the clown from before? Yeah. What's he doing out here? The clown continued to cough, now doubled over. Reaching out to the air with curled fingers in pained agony, the clown began to breathe in labored pants, incomprehensible words occasionally coming out of his mouth. One of his hands gripped his chest and the other gripped his stomach, which seemed to be gurgling visibly. I shifted my weight, snapping on a branch I didn't know was there. The clown looked around desperately, his glazed, unfocused eyes eventually aligning directly with mine. As soon as our eyes met, he began limping over to us quickly. Despite thinking we were hidden well in the bushes, we clearly weren't. But we weren't about to wait for a disheveled-looking bald clown to potentially nab us, either. Artie and I tried our best to keep ourselves from screaming as we ran further into the woods, the clown's large shoes almost right behind us if the crinkling of leaves was anything to go by. He yelled for us to please wait with a low, guttural growl, but we knew better than to stop. The clown continued to advance on us until suddenly, he stopped in his tracks. Realizing he stopped, Artie and I ran behind a tree to catch our breaths. Our attention shifted back to the clown, who was now a few yards away with a panicked expression on his face. His face looked similar to when someone needed to vomit, and apparently he couldn't run after us anymore because he stood eerily still in the distance, eyes rolling to the back of his head. The buttons on his shirt popped off one by one as the mass of his stomach grew and grew. As his stomach grew in mass, the clown's head faced the night sky and his mouth slowly ripped open, a low groan vibrating from his throat. And then, the inevitable happened: the clown's stomach burst forth. Evidently, it had already been stitched up at least once, because the stomach exploded from the top of the seam of the stitches to the bottom. Artie and I watched in aghast horror as organs we didn't even know the names of spilled out into the floor. And even more horrifying were the body parts that spilled out. What seemed to be small, rotting limbs and small animal carcasses also shot out from his stomach. The clown fell to his knees, a strange black liquid pouring out from his mouth in the hole where his stomach used to be. We heard a sickening crack, possibly from his spine, as his body folded onto itself and he fell backwards onto his bald head, ceasing to make any further movements. What the hell? What the hell is that shit? Artie put a hand over his mouth, gagging in horror. I fought back a spew of vomit myself. This was not happening. There was no way we just saw a person literally explode in front of our very eyes. Out of sick, morbid worry, I looked over again because I just couldn't fathom what had happened was real. Nope, the corpse was still there. But now, in addition to the body, a solemn figure loomed over the body holding a lantern in one hand and a big, leaky garbage bag in the other. I didn't have to recognize his face to know who he was. The antlers from his head gave it away. And he spotted me. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. Artie looked petrified. The dear boy had a mix of emotions on his face, but mostly looked shocked and angry. He glanced at the body of the exploded clown, and then back at us. I really needed to pee. There was no bathroom inside the tent. I couldn't think of any bullshit excuse in the panicked mindset I was in. The truth was as good as anything. Whatever we had just witnessed was already burned into my memories, and it was all I could do to not have a full-blown panic attack in the middle of the woods. "You two need to get back inside before the show ends," he snarled. He dropped the garbage bag he was holding and grabbed me and Artie, dragging us back towards the circus. "What? You're insane if you think I'm going back in there. I'm going home." Artie attempted to extract himself from Danny's vice grip. Danny stopped, giving Artie a harsh glare. "If you aren't in your seats by the time the show ends, they're going to come after you," Danny said. "Where were you sitting?" "Huh? Where in the bleachers were you sitting before?" "All the way to the right, by the pole," I stammered. The dear boy led us around the large circumference of the circus tent, identifying the flap Artie and I snuck out of. It turned out, we hadn't actually ran that far into the woods. The clown, adrenaline and the weaving in between trees may have made us feel that we went further than we actually had. "Why, you're not gonna kill us?" Artie whimpered as we approached the tent. "If I was going to, I would have already, don't you think?" The dear boy replied curtly. He pushed us towards the flap. "As soon as this show ends, leave. And don't come back." We didn't question him. There was an urgency in his voice that we didn't want to probe into. And hell, if we were going to come back to the scene of a brutal death, we were only middle schoolers, now scarred for life by what we had seen. Artie and I hurriedly made myself back into the tent, just as the final drum roll played. All the circus members came out with the obvious exception of the round clown and Danny the dear boy. They took one final bow to a standing ovation, taking off any masks or blindfolds they had on for their performances. It was then it became clear none of the circus performers were adults. Everyone down to the trapeze artists, dancers, the tightrope walkers, and even the animal tamers, they were all children, teenagers at most. There were no adults except for Mr. Wax, who took off his top hat and gave a bow. It didn't take a detective to realize that something was very wrong with an all-minor circus ensemble. That was the last straw. We needed to get the fuck out of there. We slid into the bleachers again. Wyatt glanced at us. "You guys took so long. Were you taking a crap?" "Wyatt," I tugged on Wyatt's shirt, forcing him to sit down. "Wyatt, we've gotta go." "But they said there's a special encore performance." "We have to go now," Artie insisted, voice shaking. Wyatt paused. "Dude, are you okay? You're shaky and way paler than usual." Jenny and Schmidt were still clapping in the front, cheering along with the other kids in the bleachers. They were obviously mesmerized by the show, but we knew that it wasn't all bright lights and cotton candy like we thought it was. There was something much more sinister in that circus. Thankfully, Wyatt must have sensed the panic Artie and I were feeling, because he got up along with us as we weaved through the bleachers to grab Jenny and Schmidt. That was amazing. Jenny smiled brightly when she saw us. "Guys, I loved that. Did you?" "Jenny, we have to go home," Artie said. "I don't feel too good." Jenny paused, inspecting Artie's face. "Oh, no. Are you getting sick?" "Yeah, I am." Artie wasn't technically lying. We both felt sick to the stomach after what we had witnessed. "But they have an encore performance," Schmidt crossed his arms. The asshole clearly only cared about spending more time with Jenny. "And we're all invited to stay." "He's not feeling well, dude," Wyatt pointed out, annoyed. "We should go home. It's probably already getting dark outside." "It's only 7. Still early, right Jenny?" Jenny seemed conflicted. On the one hand, she probably didn't want to leave her brother. On the other hand, Hannah was announcing there would be a brief intermission in between the show and the encore, which no one wanted to miss. "I mean, you can get home with Wyatt and Jason, can't you?" Jenny suggested. I was appalled. Maybe it was because of the sick atrocity me and Artie had the misfortune of witnessing, but in the moment, her pushing a sick Artie onto me and Wyatt because she wanted to stay and watch the encore felt incredibly selfish. "Are you serious?" I said. Jenny seemed surprised at my outburst, but I didn't care. "Jason, let's just go, guys." I didn't want to argue with her and Schmidt in front of all the kids from school. A few of them who sat on our side of the bleachers were filtering out of the tent at this point, and I wasn't willing to stay even one more second in the tent for a mediocre view of the show with the newly formed trauma engraved in my brain. I led Artie and Wyatt out of the tent, determined to get the hell out of those woods as fast as possible. Mr. Wax was stationed in front of the tent, saying goodbye to all the kids who were leaving. I braced myself for the worst. There was no way we could just walk past him. "Leaving already?" Mr. Wax flashed his grin. "And without your friends, hmm?" He doesn't feel too good," I pointed to Artie. Artie nodded weakly. The same could have easily been said for me. "That's a shame. I hope you feel better, Arthur. Thank you for attending my show." He pat Artie on the head, sending us off so he could say goodbye to the other kids who were filtering out of the circus. Strangely enough, there was a genuine quality in his voice that I would have believed if it weren't for the unsettling nature of the circus. The three of us walked back into the woods where we came from, this time following a crowd of kids around our age back to town. We were all using the last bits of daylight to make it home before our parents started to worry about our whereabouts. The walk back felt a lot faster than the way there, probably due to a newfound familiarity of the road. "You two feeling okay?" Wyatt asked halfway through, breaking the silence between us three. "Are you guys mad that I didn't go outside with you?" "No, it's nothing," I replied. "We're just not feeling good." "I never told him my name," Artie blurted, still pale and clearly in shock. "Huh? I never told Mr. Wax my name. But he called me Arthur as we left." He continued to walk in silence after that, but it was enough for Wyatt to realize that something truly was off and that it may not have been the right time to ask questions. I elected not to say anything after that, wanting to forget the clown as much as I could. But Artie's words kept playing on repeat in my head, even when we finally got home. Even as my parents yelled at me for getting home a little later than usual, telling me to take a bath because I was filthy, I couldn't shake off the fact that we never did personally introduce ourselves to Mr. Wax. There was no way he should have known our names individually. I wish I could say everything ended there, that maybe the circus was just some weird summer fever dream that never happened. I wish I could say that everything was fine after that, and we spent the rest of our summer in blissful ignorance and boredom in Schmidt's treehouse. But evidently, Mr. Wax's circus wasn't a one-time act. And that was just the beginning of what proved to be the most eventful and traumatic summer of our lives. Jenny and Schmidt, along with the few other kids who stayed for the encore, never made it back home that night.